Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns. It's our first of a two-parter in which we try and take in the entire history of the Godzilla franchise of all sorts of different aspects, including Japanese versions and some American versions. I've deactivated the doorbell because obviously looking at... Oh dear, I can imagine that we're going to get a couple of guests today.
It's just you. I think it's because you said Japanese versions. I think you excited someone.
Before we get onto any extra guests, I want to introduce who we've got on the show. I am Alan. I'm always here. Hello. Over there, also usually here. In fact, every week he's here. Sol.
Right.
Hello. And Sol, just before we get any further, you are a Godzilla expert. Is that correct?
Insofar as I've seen all 20-something Godzilla films, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And also joining us today is a pretty much same as me, a Godzilla novice, Gareth Allen.
Yes, hello. Yes, a novice.
Hello. Where do we start? I guess, Sol, I would like to hand over to you. Give us the origins of Godzilla.
Japan got nuked.
Yes.
And then they made some art out of it, and that was Godzilla. Basically.
So in the film, in the Godzilla film, the original one was made in 1954 in Japan.
Yes. Gojira.
In that film, Godzilla is a kind of mythical beast from a little island community that they believe in this thing.
Yes.
Is there any background to that, or is it a whole new concept that they made up for this film?
I mean, that's very in keeping with Japanese mythology. It's very in the spirit of it. I think they've just made it up for this film, but it's, drawing upon the sorts of folklore and what have you that Japan has. I think most people who haven't seen the original Godzilla always assume it takes its cues from the later films, and that the nuclear bombs and nuclear testing, mutate a lizard into a massive monster. But no, it is just they accidentally awaken this ancient beast from the depths of the ocean. I think the explanation for that depends on which version of the film you watch as well. I don't think I've ever seen the American re-edit of the original film, which may piss around with that. I've only ever watched the subtitled Japanese film. Do you guys know which version you watched?
Yeah, it was the subtitled Japanese one I watched. The one without Raymond Burr.
Well, I watched both.
Oh, get you.
So I can give you a bit of a comparison later on when we get into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's for the time being, let's deal with the actual original Japanese version. So they awaken this monster from the depths, who's a kind of a pretty classic kind of Harryhausen dinosaur thing.
Except he's not animated using stop-start.
No, I meant in terms of look. It's got a kind of 1930s idea of what dinosaurs were kind of look.
Yeah, but this is using... I mean, I don't think this was the first film to do it, but it's using a very specific technique that you don't really get outside of the Japanese monster movies.
What, you say very specific technique? Do you mean a bloke in a rubber suit?
Yeah, with miniatures. You just don't get that elsewhere, do you? It's Japanese monster movies from the 50s through to about the 80s.
It is very idiosyncratic. Like you watch it and it's a little bit laughable at first, but you sort of get used to it. But yeah, you're right. You don't see that style anywhere else, do you?
Yeah. I mean, by the standards of 1950s special effects, I think these are very impressive. But yeah, I mean, by modern standards, they are. Some of the shots of Godzilla look fucking hilarious. It's like he's got googly eyes and just this rubbery puppet monster. But I mean, yeah, for when it was made, I think it's very impressive.
I think it's more impressive in the first one, perhaps partly because it's black and white. You can't see it quite so well. But it's 10 years earlier than you would expect the technology to move on through the decades, and it really doesn't much, does it?
Yes.
But yeah, like I say, obviously Japan was the victim of a nuclear bomb in World War II, and this film, but Japan's the only nation that's been nuclear bombed.
Well, as an offensive action, yeah.
Yeah, rather
plenty more been bombed as just, hey, let's see if this bomb works.
Yeah. Yeah, not counting nuclear tests and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's really fascinating how it's affected them culturally.
Yeah.
And this film was about 10 years on after that happened, so they're still, very much feeling the effects of it. There's probably a lot of people listening who haven't seen the original 1954 Godzilla and are aware of Godzilla from its sequels and seeing clips of it. And I think the original film is quite a surprise when you actually watch it, because it's a lot more serious and nuanced and muted than I think people would typically expect. What is it? Basically, there's a few humans running around trying to do something with a bomb, and it is the human story that the film focuses on. But then in the background, there's this monster just wandering around, killing people, shooting lasers at them, and they're trying to deal with that. It's very straightforward what you think of when you think of a Godzilla plot. But yeah, they've been doing some nuclear testing. It's woken up this beast from the depths of the ocean, and he was designed to look like a mushroom cloud in the original film.
Oh, really?
We know him as a green lizard, but the original film, obviously being black and white, I think the suit was grey. I think they conceived of him as a grey monster. It was only in the sequels when they moved to colour that they decided to make him green and a bit more bright and exciting.
Well, what about the personal story that comes through in this? Because, there's a bit of a love triangle that doesn't really add anything to the story.
I've got to say, I thought that in broad terms, the acting was pretty terrible. Now, I don't speak Japanese, so I'm reading the subtitles at the same time as I'm watching it. But the acting was pretty shonky, wasn't it?
It's always difficult to judge whenever you're watching a foreign film because you don't speak the language. Yeah, it's difficult to get the subtleties of a nuance of performance.
Well, it wasn't subtle, was it? I think that's the point. It was like watching someone in the 19th century music hall with all it was a very dramatic performance.
The girl, the main girl in it, definitely. There's the scene where she's watching the fish tank as it destroys all the fish.
Oh God, yeah.
And she sort of swoons and goes, "Oh
my God, the fish are dead!" Oh.
But yeah, there's a love triangle between a kind of principal hero guy,
the journalist and the eye patch scientist.
Yeah, eye patch scientist. His sort of betrothed, but she's fallen in love with the other gentleman. Is it her dad who's like the main scientist guy?
Can we talk about the magic bullet then? Am I allowed to do the accent, or is that racist?
I think we've got a couple of guests who could probably give us information on that. We've got a new comedy character who can check these things for us.
Oh fucking hell! Jesus Christ! Go on then.
Ding dong.
So, I'll get the door. Oh hello. Oh, it's you again. So,
hello, it's me. It's definitely not racist Liam Neeson. Hello there. Hello lads.
Right, how have you been?
I just drop in every now and then to make sure that nobody's saying anything too racist. I understand you're talking about the Godzilla films. Now, this could be problematic, because as we all know, it's fine to do funny accents as long as the people are white. But if they're not white, it's very difficult to do the funny accent because that's racist.
The weapon that they use, and I am quoting directly from the film here, is called an Oxygen Destoroyah. How was that, Liam?
That's definitely not right. In fact, it doesn't matter even if it's contextually justified or accurate, it's still racist. I don't even know if I'm Northern Irish or Southern Irish. I don't even know what accent I'm doing, so I might even be British. Who knows? Anyway, what were we talking about?
Well, okay, so the Oxygen Destroyer. So yeah, this Oxygen Destroyer, he throws this little peanut-sized thing of Oxygen Destroyer into a fish tank, and I don't know, all the fish dissolve or something. It's horrifying to this woman, which, I don't want to sound cruel or heartless, but I could live with seeing some fish die. I don't think that would traumatise me in quite that way.
Well, we had to get the reaction. We had to understand
how horrifying it
caused. Yeah. So basically makes a the whole point of it is that he's accidentally created this thing that can destroy life very easily. He's basically like, I can't let this get into the wrong hands. I'm going to destroy everything.
He's like Oppenheimer, isn't he?
Yes. So he's and again, the nuclear connection there is pretty obvious. But then of course it's the only hope they have to destroy this unstoppable force. What is it trying to say? Because ultimately they do use it, and he uses it, but he destroys all the information on it so that it can never be used again. He also kills himself because all the work is in his head, of course. So, he kind of makes the ultimate sacrifice.
Is that an anti-nuclear commentary then? So saying, yes, we have used these weapons, but we should rid the world of them.
Yeah, well, that is it, because it's definitely saying, yes, we're using it, and we were right to use it. It's the correct choice. So I don't know. It feels a little bit messy. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's trying to say. So, okay, what else? Anything else for the original Godzilla?
Music?
Yes. I really like the music, and I'm not normally the sort of, I don't really notice the score very often. That's not really my thing. But there was a few times, I don't know, maybe it's because because it's not in English, so I was paying more attention to the ambient sounds. I'm not sure, but there were several times where I thought, oh, God, this score's brilliant. It's really bouncing me along,
Yeah, I think for a film from 1954, I think this has remarkable music. It's got the main Godzilla theme is brilliant. It's I think it's become quite iconic, but maybe only in Japan and cult circles.
Can you do it for us, Sol?
It goes. Oh, see, I've got the fucking marching music in my head, which isn't the Godzilla theme. The one that goes. The Godzilla one goes dun 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 dun.
That's it.
Yeah.
I love it. I got all excited again, Sol.
It really, it's quite, it adds to the sense of just relentless, unstoppable force, because it just, I know, I think it's great, I really do. I think the music in this film is a really unsung, and you don't really hear people talk about the music of Godzilla all that often. But, I mean, it's definitely, it's made a mark in some capacity. I think I've spoken on this show before, but when I went to see Ready Player One, the one moment that really worked for me as a nerd in the way that the whole film was meant to, the one little Easter egg that I loved was when Godzilla appeared, Mechagodzilla appeared near the end, and then they wove the classic Godzilla theme into the score for a few seconds. And I was like, oh my god, they used the original theme. No one else is going to appreciate that. That's just for me and Alan Silvestri.
Can I ask you a question about Japan? I don't know anything about Japanese culture particularly, or history.
Well, maybe we should get someone who does in
Yeah?
as a consultant.
Yeah? Do you know anyone?
Should I give him a call?
Yeah, go on.
I'll light up the Japanese Bond signal.
Just for anyone who hasn't heard, doesn't normally listen to the show, we have a regular recurring character called Japanese Bond, who is an incarnation of James Bond, played by Sean Connery in one of the early Bond films, I can't remember which, in which James Bond goes undercover as a Japanese fisherman in a spectacular acting tour de force.
See, when you say it out loud like that, it sounds ridiculous.
Oh, lads, I show you flair.
Japanese Bond there. Hello. Now, Japanese Bond, you are, as we know, a Japanese fisherman.
Oh, yes, yes.
And in the 60s, no less.
Yes.
So
oh, yes.
I wanted to ask about, whenever I watch a Japanese film from the 50s, usually a Yasujiro Ozu film, they all live in these little sort of wooden houses with slidey doors, and they sleep on the floor with little crap pillows. Now, this is, like, if I saw this in a sort of a Western idea of Japanese stuff, I'd think it was cliche, but this is actual Japanese film, so I'm assuming it's accurate. But I can never tell whenever I watch an Ozu film, whether it's set in the 50s or if it's set in like 1820 or something. It's like there's no benchmark for me. Like, I can watch a Western film and see from the technology that they're using where it's set roughly. So is this a cultural thing? Because obviously, by the time we get to the 80s Godzilla films, it's obvious, it's a very 80s looking place.
Well, it's shit in the shitty, isn't it, lads?
In the shitty?
Hey, I don't know about that. Making fun of how I say shitty, lads. Liam Neeson, what do you think of that?
I'm Northern Irish now, so hang on, I'm just trying to find the accent. I can't do it.
All right, lads. Well, I think what you'll find is, in Japan, it'll look the same forever. Doesn't change.
Is that right?
Oh, aye, they still use VHS players. You go outside the city, they still use Sony Walkman. Crazy. Right? Yeah, in the big city, it's all robots and flying hotels and shit like that. But you go 1 mile outside the city and it's like the fucking Flintstones. people running round in cars with their feet. So I think you'll find it's very accurate, everything you see in these films.
I'm a little bit wary about doing this, but can I make a serious point? I think what you're asking, Alan, is about like
I am
Japanese
actually asking
culture.
A genuine question.
Right, lads, I'll go step out then, because it sounds like you've got this without me.
Okay,
feel free to give me a call if you need me.
It's got a bit too real there.
So we talked about the the Second World War and the impact that had on Japan. But if you go back another 80, 100 years, it was like a feudal samurai society, and there was these huge changes to westernise Japan very, very quickly. And so I think that they're still wrestling with that change as well.
Oh, completely, right. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it does feel like lost in time, but it's largely because we haven't got the cultural touchstones to kind of draw on, and
exactly.
It's like you can to us. So yeah,
you can look at an old film and you can tell sort of where, like an American film, for example, you can tell where it's set based on it's got a washing machine or whatever, or it's like got a plastic telephone. We
had this similarly. We had this recently, similarly when we did Kung Fu Hustle. Which is obviously a Chinese film from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And I only realised on the most recent rewatch for this podcast that it seems to be that it's meant to be set in the 40s. and you and Calvin were both sort of as surprised to hear that as I was, because we just kind of all assumed it was set in like fantasy China. Just not like, that's just what China is always. Stylized China.
Yeah. Well, perhaps a nice segue into the influence or the impact that the original Godzilla film had in the West, because obviously that's why we're talking about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about it. There's lots of Japanese films we don't know about. Do you want to tell the story, Saul, of how Godzilla was released in America?
I don't know. It sounds like you'll know better than I do.
Okay. So a couple of years after Godzilla was made in 1956, it got an American release, but it was heavily re-edited or Americanized, as they called it at the time. Yeah. And what they did was they introduced an American character played by Raymond Burr. This is about the same time as Rear Window, isn't it? 54 Rear Window. They basically implant him like Forrest Gump style in all these scenes, except without the technology available to do that. So it's heavily edited.
So when you say that, see, I've never watched the American version, which I believe is called Godzilla King of the Monsters.
King of the Monsters! With an exclamation mark.
So when you say he's implanted in these scenes, because my understanding was they shot some new stuff and there were some scenes presumably set in an American government room that were just spliced in, but the way you've described it sounds like they've added his character to the scenes that already exist. They'll kind of cut to him and they'll say, yes, that's a good point, but what about this in America?
Yes. Well, basically, if what you just said there in terms of, there's someone set in an American base and they just splice that in, that's what happens in the 1980s one, which we'll be looking at in a little while. And that's basically what I was expecting to find when I watched Godzilla King of the Monsters. However, it was a lot more involved than that. I was actually quite surprised by how well it worked. It was, yeah. Basically, they have Raymond Burr. He's an American journalist in Japan. He's working for an international newspaper or whatever. He gets caught up in Tokyo, gets smashed up. He does voiceover over some of the things. So at the opening, where there's a ship and then there's a big flash of light and they're all running around. So he's narrating that and sort of explaining what's happening, almost as if you're watching like newsreel footage kind of thing. And then he's introduced as a character. So, like all the scenes where, for example, the politicians are discussing what's happening, or he is just there as a journalist, and then there's another guy there with him who is his translator, and so it just cuts to a shot of them two with a few other extras,
right,
against a sort of a wall that looks like it might be in the same sort of setting.
Yeah,
and he'll go, "Oh, what are they saying, Tomo?" And he'll go, "Oh, well, they're just discussing, what they should do about Godzilla. These guys are saying that they should do this. These guys are saying they should do this. And so that's it." And then they'll cut to the footage actually from the film. You'll see that. But then all the principal characters are dubbed, so we can obviously tell what they're saying. Then the only times where it really falls down is when Raymond Burr is called on to interact with one of the actors. Because for the most part, he's just sort of like, they've come up with a narrative device for him to be there and watching and kind of commenting.
Yeah.
But then they'll have these odd shots where it's just like him and the scientist talking, and they've just found someone who looks a bit like him from behind, and it's just really awkwardly shot. So that's not good. That's the only time it really falls down. But other than that, I thought it was a very nice job of making it work for an American audience.
Yeah.
Especially in the 50s, where it's just like, I mean, no one's just going to go and see a Japanese film subtitled. It obviously found some kind of audience. And it was also, I think I read somewhere, it was the first film since the war that had sort of Japanese characters as heroes, rather than, the enemy that they're fighting. So from a cultural point of view, this was presenting the Japanese in a different way, a post-war way, and that obviously
new allies in the East.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, frankly, better than I was expecting it to be, and we'll sort of come back to that for the 1985 version, and we'll discuss relatives.
Would you have one rating for both versions of the film, or did it make such a significant difference to it that
I gave it a different rating?
So, shall we start by rating the original Japanese Gojira?
Yes. Rate it. Let's rate the original Godzilla.
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of the original. I think it's really quite darkly poetic, sorrowful film born out of a very interesting time in a nation's history. I love it. I think it really taps into something. I think I'll give it a very... Oh, this is hard. I think I'll give it a really good 8 out of 10. Okay. I kind of want to give it a 9, but I think it's an 8.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's something of a cultural touchstone now, and you see it in that context. But there are elements to it that are a bit shoddy, like the acting and stuff like that. I mean, I gave it a solid 7, basically.
I agree with you that the acting is the only thing that I like. Obviously, we talked about the effects; they're not great now, but I think for the time they were good.
Yeah,
the score is fantastic, and it makes you think, doesn't it? It makes you think, that film. So I really enjoyed it, but the acting was pretty bad. So I've given it an 8 as well.
Okay,
fair enough.
That's not bad. The American edit, Alan?
Well, like I said, it was quite watchable, very watchable, but it does kind of remove the kind of point of it all. So it kind of reduces it to what is essentially a monster movie, which is fine. And I was genuinely sort of shocked by how well it worked. So I gave it a 6.
Not bad.
Because it still has all those kind of elements, really.
Yeah, it is quite shocking how quickly when I first decided to go through watching these films, all the Godzilla films, I thought I was going to see a slow deterioration into Power Rangers-esque nonsense. No, it is immediate.
Am I right? Godzilla, when it was made, was one of the kind of biggest budget films that the Japanese...
I believe it was the most expensive Japanese film ever made at its time, yeah.
So I guess you can't just keep maintaining that level of...
Well, I don't know. I think it was successful. It made its money back, you know? Logic would dictate, certainly Hollywood logic would dictate, that's when you throw more money at it. But I don't think that's the approach they took.
God, no.
So the first sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, is awful. It's shit. It's everything I think people think of when they think of shitty Godzilla sequels, but it's not even in color, so it's not even like bright and fun. It feels cheap. It's boring. They're obsessed with dinosaurs. They just keep going on about when dinosaurs were on Earth and just say, oh, well, Godzilla's a dinosaur, I guess. There's scenes of the dawn of life on Earth with dinosaurs walking around, and it's people in the shittest dinosaur costumes ever, but they're not even meant to be like gigantic anymore. It's not done that way. It's just people dressed up as dinosaurs walking around in like a sort of real size set. It's shit. I'm gonna rush through all these sequels until we get up to the next one we've watched, which I don't think should be too far. So, but yeah, I give Godzilla Raids Again 3 out of 10 for context sake. That's how much of a drop off there was just immediately, and it really just feels like they didn't care. And to be fair, it came out the following year, so I mean they really did just pump these out. And Toho, which is the company that makes Godzilla, yeah, I mean they were just pumping these films out, basically. And in 1956, they released Rodan. What's it called? Rodan the Sky Monster, or Rodan the Flying Monster, depends which, goes by many names, all these films do. And then in 1961, I haven't seen it, but they released Mothra, which is a film about a giant moth back in Japan.
But is Mothra connected? We watched Mothra versus Godzilla, but is the original Mothra connected to Godzilla at all, or was it just a separate thing?
Just its own thing, just a new monster movie. Toho were just pumping out these kaiju movies in the 60s. And I think Godzilla is obviously the most successful, the most iconic, the most famous one. Mothra was released in the 60s, and I think people always think of characters like Rodan and Mothra being Godzilla villains, but they weren't. They were all, like what Marvel does now. They were all. I mean, it's the closest analog would be the Universal horror. They were just making these monster movies, and then at some point they thought, oh, we own all these characters. Why don't we just stick them in a film together? Yeah. But I do think knowing that explains part way why Godzilla versus Mothra is so fucking insane in places, in ways where it just kind of, it almost feels like it's just going, keep up.
Yeah, it felt a bit like watching one of those Infinity War type films, but without watching all the backstory. Setup films.
And so then 1962, we got the third Godzilla film, Godzilla vs. King Kong, where I believe we've already covered this film in some capacity on the show, but basically they bought the rights to King Kong from someone who wasn't legally able to sell the rights. And they made this big kind of rock'em sock'em film with King Kong changed into a gigantic ape who consumes lightning and electricity to gain the power of... It was very odd. And again, it's not very good. I think I gave that a 5 out of 10 when we did it. Yeah, then the fourth Godzilla film was Godzilla vs. Mothra, or Mothra vs. Godzilla, or Mosura Tae Gojira.
Oh, I love it when you talk Japanese, Sol.
We've seen this one, all three of us, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so when we were deciding which ones to watch, obviously Sol being the expert put some forward and I did a little bit of reading on it. So this one felt like...
It's one of the most iconic,
Yeah, I'd heard of Mothra, and it was like a few sequels in, so this is give us a good example of what they were doing with the sequels, I figured.
Yeah. And I think it's a good indication of this period of let's just start crossing over our kaiju and doing these big so-and-so versus so-and-so films. It's a really solid example of those and what they were doing. And, I think this is generally regarded as one of the better Godzilla films, believe it or not.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect with this, but I certainly didn't expect what I got. Which was, first of all, my first thought was like the distinct comedy elements to this film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, tonally worlds apart from the first film.
Oh, man, the guy who was always eating an egg. Oh, did we laugh?
I mean, tonally, the second film is very po-faced, but I'd say this comedy element started to come in with King Kong versus Godzilla. This is sort of a continuation of what they were doing there, but yeah.
I suppose you've got to, haven't you, really? It's a giant flying fucking moth. You've got to have a bit of a laugh about it.
But the thing is, though, you think a giant moth, how can that be silly? But it's so well realised and so scary. With its hubcap eyes. So here's a problem. Compared to, say, Godzilla or King Kong, Mothra doesn't seem very dynamic or scary.
Or able to do anything.
But yeah, speaking of someone who really dislikes moths and their flappiness is like really freaks me out. Didn't get any of that from Mothra because it doesn't move quickly.
It doesn't move
enough.
at
Its
all.
wings can't actually move.
These monsters, they're brought to life with people in rubber suits, stood on sets with miniatures. But Mothra being a moth, there isn't someone inside a costume giving it life. It's just a big piñata being dangled on a string.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't work, does it?
I just like the general look of the film. It was like that classic, quite 1950s Technicolor, although it was the 60s.
Well, the first note I've written was, oh, it's in colour. The second note I've written is, fucking hell, it's in colour.
Yeah, I mean, the colour came in with the previous film, actually. King Kong versus Godzilla was the first one where they switched to colour, but obviously we didn't see that. But yeah, it's very much the same thing, and this colour palette continues for a while.
I quite like that, though. It really does put it in a time and place.
Yeah, very of its time, isn't it? It's almost psychedelic.
Yeah, but I like that, and they seem to play up to it with the multicoloured egg, and Mothra's got orange stuff on him, and or her maybe.
Yeah, and Godzilla is green, bright green, instead of grey.
Yeah.
Like the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, exactly.
This is all well and good, but can we please talk about the fairies?
Yeah,
right, so I think this is perhaps the most egregious holdover from this being a crossover film.
Yeah, so this just wasn't explained. Obviously these are characters from the original Mothra film. But there's this disembodied singing voice, and then they find these two miniature fairy twins singing, and it's like, oh, fair enough.
The characters are just kind of like, a couple of fairies. That's weird. Let's try and catch them. But
they do it. Yeah, they do at least think, oh, we can catch these and make money out of them. So they're obviously. We accept that this is like an unusual thing, but it's not like oh my god, these 6-inch women, what's going on?
But here's a question for you. Before the fairies came along, these two guys, the guy who's bought the egg, what's the master plan to make money here? It's just an egg. I mean, it's a big egg.
It's going to go off.
But you're talking about building an amusement park around it. Right, do you want to come to Alton Towers? Nah, it's not really my thing. There's a giant fucking egg. Oh, I'm there.
It was the 60s. They didn't have much in the way of entertainment.
If someone had an egg that was like 20 metres long, you're telling me you wouldn't go and have a look at it?
I am telling you, I would not go and look at it. I would not go and look at it if it was the end of my street.
Yeah, you would.
Liar. You liar.
You'd go as far afield as Leeds city centre for a big egg, I reckon.
I do as well.
I do not understand the financial master plan here.
I reckon you probably you go around Yorkshire Sculpture Park, right? Yeah. Are you telling me you've never once gone there and one of the sculptures has just been a big egg?
Saul, I'm going to have to stop you there because I think Yorkshire Sculpture Park is bollocks. So I am not the target market for the egg.
Well, I went to the Stan Laurel Museum, so I don't know if I've got... That's less interesting than an egg, I must admit. Basically, the egg just floats into the ocean, for whatever reason. These fishermen get it. They sell it to a sort of P.T. Barnum type. None of that ever really means anything or
it does lead to that. It does lead to a terrifically violent scene, doesn't it? I know I'm jumping ahead here, but when they fight at the end, he probably beats him, like really graphically beats him, and then he gets his gun and shoots him in the head. That feels very wrong tonally.
But then and then the other guy shoots him, and then none of that matters because they get.
Well, you don't punch the shit out of a billionaire, do you? Not even a yen billionaire.
That's almost £3,000. And then, but none of that really matters because then the building gets smashed by Godzilla, and they all die. It's just none of that's really relevant. The fact that he's trying to bilk the fishermen out of their money never goes anywhere. There's a lot of just nonsense in this film in terms of like our main sort of protagonists here are a journalist, a woman who goes around with him who is just a photographer, I think.
Yeah.
And then a doctor. Yeah, then we have two little women, twins, who are telepathically connected to Mothra, or the egg at least.
They're from Monster Island, which is a concept that I don't think has come up yet in this world, but it's just dropped in like we should know.
But the island is incredible, isn't it? I mean, the people there, it's like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but somehow more racist. Like, I don't really understand the intricacies of Japanese culture enough, but that felt insulting.
I did get there and think, is this racist? Oh, well, it is Japanese, so maybe it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah,
it was It was like when I watched Black Panther, and I thought, oh, is it okay to fetishize Black African culture like this? Oh, the director's black. All right, I think it's fine.
No, it's fine.
I might be completely wrong, but I think this is the first we hear of Monster Island. So I think perhaps it is a thing from Mothra. Maybe in the film Mothra, it is referred to as
Mothra lives.
Yeah, and I think maybe as it's presented in Mothra, my guess might be that it's kind of a world where everything's massive, because there's certainly an indication of just, normal things being the wrong size, humans being tiny, moths being giant, eggs being massive. There's like a giant turtle when they go there, skeleton.
Yeah.
And I think maybe they just subsequently turned that into Monster Island because they wanted to just say, oh, well, that's where all the monsters come from. It's just easier.
They asked Mothra to come and help. He says no.
He says, Godzilla is reward for your demon flame, which is I might get that on a tattoo.
Well, yeah, this is a very kind of subtle nuclear message where the islanders live on an island where the nuclear testing was happening or something like that. Is it Mothra herself who says, I'll go and help?
Well, it seems to be the fairies who are telepathically contacting Mothra.
Yeah.
Telepathically, but they have to sing when they do it, though.
Oh man, the singing! I've got that little Mosura thing stuck in my head, and I have for like a week now. I can't get rid of it. But yeah, so they say, well, where is Mothra? And the fairies say, oh, she's just there. And like, everyone just turns to the left and there's this giant fucking moth. Oh, there. Oh, that one. Yes, okay.
But also, Mothra is ready to die, then has to reluctantly use the last of her strength to go and save her egg. She's going to save her egg, and you think it would going to save the babies would be a kind of like, yeah, of course she's going to do that. But it's not presented like that. It's like, oh, okay, I'll defeat Godzilla for you if that's what I have to do. All right. But Godzilla's going to eat the egg, right?
Well, that's not really... that appears to be the case, but we're never really sure why. Is it radioactive? I don't know. I never really figured that out. But yes, Godzilla represents a clear and present danger to Mothra's egg, and hence fighting ensues.
Yeah. Well, you say fighting.
Well, yeah.
A giant moth puppet being flapped around near a man in a rubber suit. Basically what happens is Mothra sort of does enough to make Godzilla piss off and then dies. But it's the egg hatching and two Mothra larvae come out, which is handy because presumably they're going to have to breed with each other for the species to continue.
Yeah.
But these larvae then they chase Godzilla because Godzilla's going to an island where a handful of school children are hiding in a cave. He doesn't know they're there, and he's not going there for them. They're in a cave where he can't get to them, so they're in no real danger. But the larvae chase him because they cannot stand to see injustice done on the island.
Yes. That was
right?
a great line.
So somehow the larvae have just hatched. They know what's going on exactly. Anyway, they chase down Godzilla, and at this point I'm thinking, what are they going to do to Godzilla? He's just going to stamp on them because they're just like these maggot things. But what happens?
Well, firstly, one of the worms bites his tail, and he
Yes.
starts flapping around like me when I've stubbed my toe. And then
He doesn't like considering like people shoot bombs into his face, and he just doesn't even blink. He's got a very sensitive tail.
Yeah, but they never think to shoot the tail, do they?
And they never think to shoot the tail.
Yeah, he's just had 300,000 volts shot through him, and he was all stoic indifference. And now he's furious because some worm's bitten his tail.
But his tail's the weak spot. Like what they need to do is build a giant door and then slam it on the tail. That's how you defeat him. But they don't think to try that. It's the arrogance of man.
Having weakened Godzilla, the two worms gang up on him and start jizzing silk out of their mouths.
But it's like laser silk.
He gets increasingly frustrated. I appreciate that this takes time to build up the jizz, but this sequence went on for a long time.
Oh, fucking hell, it going on
God,
for a
it
long
just kept
time.
going.
He just stands there as well, doesn't he? It's not like he thinks, "Oh, I better do something about this." He just kind of takes it.
But this is already after we've had the Mothra Godzilla fight and basically the film is over. So this is all extra anyway. But basically they wrap him up in silk and then he falls over. Is that all? Is that the
Yeah,
end?
that's it. And he falls into the water and see you later.
Is he gone? Well, I don't know. He could be dead at the bottom of the sea, or he might have just gone home. We don't know. We can't tell. There's no way of possibly knowing what's under the water over there. Like, we couldn't possibly look beneath the water to see if he's dead. So, who knows?
We talked a lot about how laughable Mothra is, and he is. But I actually quite liked a lot of the shots of Godzilla in this film. There was quite a lot of long shots where you had people sort of panicking in the foreground and Godzilla looming in the background. I quite liked that effect. That was good.
I thought there was some nice model work as well,
Yeah,
with all the little buildings and cars and stuff. I liked all that stuff. It was quite nice.
Yeah, it's quite a consistent part of this franchise. Really, you get a lot of nice stuff with that. I guess because that's what this company was doing. Toho, they got good at it. They became world leaders in rubber suit monster special effects, which is particularly noticeable actually as you get really far along, because it's like when you watch the latter day Chucky movies and the puppetry is like really advanced. And
the twins who play the little pixie things.
Yeah.
Apparently they were a vocal duo. That's when their principal career, and they were known as the Peanuts. Just for what it's worth.
All right. Brilliant.
Well, I really like them. I mean, they were sort of ridiculous and laughable, of course, but I don't know. They were sort of sweet. I liked them.
I mean, they come back throughout the series. Pretty much whenever Mothra appears, they come with Mothra. It's like a package. Right. Well, I think this is a pretty dreadful film. It's just boring. That's kind of the worst thing about it. There's stuff in it that's really kind of interesting, but then everything just goes on for too long, and it's just dull. And so I give it a 3 out of 10.
I give it a 5. I don't know. I found it fairly watchable in most of it. Yeah, I agree. It wasn't particularly good and quite boring, but there was enough sort of weird, wacky elements to keep my interest. Perhaps just because it's an area of film that I don't know anything about, so it was new to me. But yeah, I gave it a 5.
Yeah, I kind of. We talked about the first one being, was it a horror film? This one was a laughable film, but it did actually make me laugh a few times. I'm not sure if I was supposed to or not, but I quite enjoyed it. But I've given it a 5. I've given it a 5, which I think is perfectly reasonable because it was terrible.
Oh, hello. I hope you are enjoying this week's episode about Godzilla. If you want to help support the show, just a reminder that we have a Patreon account now, patreon.com/dimreturns, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to all sorts of bonus content. Most notably, we have just put a full-length bonus episode up covering Avengers Endgame, but we also put Diminisodes up as often as possible, where we cover other new releases and things here and there that we've seen. Early access when available, you get a shout out on the show, all that sort of stuff. So, head over to patreon.com/dimreturns. Like I say, Avengers Endgame, hey? A whole episode about it, yeah? Back to the show.
Right, well, I mean, we're still in the very early days of Godzilla with this one. I mean, fuck me, then they released Monster of Monsters, Ghidorah, which is the introduction to King Ghidorah. I don't know if you've ever seen King Ghidorah. You probably have. He's one of the big iconic. He's the three-headed guy who fights against Godzilla.
Ah, yes.
And I mean, I kind of wish we'd watched that one, because the special effects used to bring him to life are just wonderful. It's like this guy's arms are in two of the necks, which are on strings, and it just looks shit. It's brilliant, and I give that one a 3 out of 10 as well. Then we had Invasion of Astro-Monster, 1965. Now I think this is the first time aliens get involved, but aliens are a big part of the Godzilla franchise as well. Aliens from Planet X request the use of Godzilla and Rodan to fight King Ghidorah, but then they've got sinister ulterior motives. So this was Godzilla and Rodan and King Ghidorah in the same film. And I give that one a 6 out of 10, actually. So I must have thought that one was quite an interesting, decent one when I watched it. One of the better ones. Then we got Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, which is another combination of Godzilla, Mothra, people like that, but fighting a new monster, Ebirah, who's like a giant lobster.
Okay.
As you're telling me these names, I'm googling them.
Yeah, have you googled Ebirah?
They're fantastic. Some of these. That Ebirah. I mean,
he is a giant lobster, isn't he?
That is amazing.
And that's not a particularly good film. I give that one a 4 out of 10. Then we got Kaiju no Kessen Gojira no Musuko. This one is Son of Godzilla. 1967. So this was the start of the franchise veering into like really overt, okay, these are for kids now territory. Godzilla has a baby and it is just like a shitty comedy. It looks like, you know that sitcom Dinosaurs?
Yes.
It's like the baby in that. And they're fighting these kind of praying mantis monsters. It's not good. I give it a 3 out of 10. So the next film, 1968, we're up to now. Operation Monsterland, or Destroy All Monsters, or Monster Invasion, depending on which version you pick up. Basically, a new race of aliens arrive, take control of Earth's monsters to turn them evil and make them attack man. And if memory serves, I think Godzilla's unaffected and basically has to be our savior, and him and Godzuki go and fight on our behalf. They're just pumping out shit. I gave that one a 5, so I guess I liked it more than some of them. Now, the next one, this is an interesting one. I kind of wish I'd got you guys to watch this one. This film is just fucking bizarre. It's like they didn't know what they were doing. They wanted to do something new with the series, but they didn't know how to approach it. It's called Godzilla All Monsters Attack, or Godzilla's Revenge, or Minya, Son of Godzilla, actually, is in some territories. That's a point. The Godzuki is sometimes called Minya in this. But yeah, that's Son of Godzilla. Now, this film doesn't make any fucking sense at all. It's about a little bullied kid at school, and he has these weird sort of daydreams about going off to Monster Island, where he befriends Godzuki, who is about the same size as him now, so the size is completely different. And Godzuki is also being bullied by monsters, and they have these kind of comedy. So fucking weird. It's like a family comedy. It's all set in this little boy's mind, and it's like him learning to deal with his bullies and through Godzilla. It's so fucking weird. But hey, you know, they tried something new. I give it 4 out of 10 because it doesn't work. But like I say, fair play to them. They
So what does the kid learn then?
to stick up for himself, I think.
To fight back, to use his heat breath to fight back.
I think pretty much, yeah. Godzilla versus Hedorah. I kind of wish we'd watched this one as well. This might well be my favourite of the Godzilla sequels. It's the closest they came, I think, to making a good one. It's a new monster. It's got a clear-cut message. Basically, Earth is so polluted that a new monster, Hedorah, the smog monster, emerges.
Oh.
And it's this kind of weird flying... It looks like a sentient spaceship, and it kind of just flies a lot around, leaving, smog behind and more pollution. I gave this quite a decent 6 out of 10. Like I say, it's one of the best if you ask me. But I'm gonna keep moving swiftly on because there's a lot of these. War of the Monsters, 1972. This was another. Let's just throw all the monsters together in a big film all at once. 5 out of 10. Godzilla versus Megalon. This is another one I kind of wish we'd watched.
Megalon.
This is infamous for probably being the worst Godzilla film ever made. The general consensus, I would say, is that it's probably the worst one ever made. I don't know if I'd quite agree with that, but it is bad. It's really bad.
I've just googled Megalon.
I mean, are you aware of Mystery Science Theater?
Yes.
Yeah. This is the Godzilla film they chose to do on Mystery Science Theater. It was deemed worthy of that show. It was so bad. So in this one, the undersea nation of Seatopia sends Megalon, a new monster, out to destroy the above world. Godzilla is in pure good guy mode in this one. He turns up to help save the day. But so does the robot created by our human characters, Jet Jaguar.
Oh my! I've got an image of Jet Jaguar.
Yeah.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
Jet Jaguar has his own theme tune, which is something to behold.
人が作ったロボットだけどジェッジャガージェッジャガーやったぜジャガー行け行け平和を守るためみんなも驚く勇気を見せるゴジラとジャガーでパンチパンチパンチ
And there's a point in the film, and I don't know, maybe this was down to translation issues, but Jet Jaguar goes from human size to Godzilla size, and the characters go, how do you do that? And the guy says, well, I taught him to program himself. I guess he programmed himself to be bigger. Godzilla can fly in this film. Just dropped in like the last 10 minutes. There's a point where he looks at the bad guy and just flies at him, just lifts off the ground and never explained. This is shite. It is awful. So I give this one a 3 out of 10, but it's almost in that so bad it's good territory. That one, it's just absolute nonsense. Then we get to 74, and this is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, which was one of the ones I suggested as a potential one for us to watch. Because Mechagodzilla is such an iconic part of the Godzilla Rogues gallery. I had a Mechagodzilla toy when I was a kid that I think I got from a pound shop when I was at the seaside, and I thought it was great.
So I'm obviously aware of Mechagodzilla, but what's the backstory? Is that humans have made him to fight Godzilla? How did that come about?
It varies from film to film, but yeah, I think generally it is. So in the first one, there are ape-like aliens. They're basically, I think Planet of the Apes have probably just come to Japan. There are aliens that arrive that just look like people wearing gorilla suits. Or not gorilla suits, gorilla heads and space clothes, like silvery clothing. And they build a robot Godzilla to attack Earth with. So then obviously Earth is like, well, we've got the real Godzilla. So that's the explanation in the first one. Then we have, I think it was basically Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla II. Revenge of Mechagodzilla, Terror of Mechagodzilla, depends what you want to call it. And this is another alien race rebuilds Mechagodzilla to...
A different set of aliens.
Yeah. So Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla... Yeah, I gave Mechagodzilla 4 out of 10. Again, we're not... It's not good. And then Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2, 3 out of 10. That film came out in 1975, and then Godzilla kind of died a death as a franchise. I think they'd milked it too hard. The films had become too shit. People were sick of it. They had just been pumping out almost one a year. And it went away for the better part of a decade until the next film that we have watched, Godzilla 1985, The Return of Godzilla, which came out in 1984, despite the name.
There's two versions of this film. One of which is called The Return of Godzilla, Japanese version, and then Godzilla 1985 is the American release of it with some extra American elements.
Yeah.
As far as I could tell.
Interesting.
So this was the start of something that Godzilla's done a lot, and I think it's going to become increasingly commonplace in Western media, the way Hollywood's behaving lately. They pretty much said, that's the Godzilla series done, it finished, we're going to start it again. So this is this is a sequel to Godzilla, the original film, that ignores every other sequel ever made. This is set in a world where none of those other films happened, just the first one, which is something they've started doing here with like Halloween last year and things like that. But it seems like a very odd concept to wipe the slate clean, except for one.
It's because origin stories are boring. Like all of those Marvel films, it's just like, okay, we've got to sit through another origin story before we see an adventure, you know? So if you get the origin story done and dusted, just see previous, and then we can actually tell a story with this character.
Yeah. So, the first time I watched this, I saw the Japanese version of the film, the proper one. But for the rewatch that we did, I watched the American version. Did you guys watch the American one?
I think I watched the Japanese version. It was certainly all, there was no English spoken.
I watched both again, but this as opposed to the original Godzilla, this is much more. Let's spend a day shooting a few little scenes. We can just insert them in, and that's basically it. Okay, so let's talk about the Japanese version first.
Yeah, I think it was poised as a real modernization / back to basics take on Godzilla. It was, let's get back to what that original film was, but we'll bring the series up to date. It's the 80s now. What we were doing in the 70s was still very much holdover from what we were doing in the 60s.
This was definitely taking it seriously again.
Yeah.
It's taking it seriously, and it's applying the same template, isn't it?
Yeah.
You start on a ship, and then there's only one survivor, and then there's you kind of get the politicians versus the boffin who's got this great idea, and it's the politicians think, oh, we'll kill it. That doesn't work. We have to rescue the boffin, and he can do it.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same template, isn't it?
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think this is one of the better Godzilla films. I think it
really
as a series of just kind of action-y monster smashing up shit set pieces, it kind of does the trick. Again, the effects aren't particularly good, but by the standards...
Yeah, this is the thing. Like in 1984, you kind of think, should be a bit better, the effects.
Well, this is interesting because you said this is one of the better ones. I thought it was crap. But I think my general problem with all these Godzilla films so far has been that my least favourite thing about these films is Godzilla.
Yeah.
Because seeing a thing just smashing up models of buildings I'm not interested in it at all.
Yeah.
I think you are.
Well,
which
no,
is why you like this kaiju thing.
I'm interested in it being done well and in an interesting capacity. But I mean, yeah, none of these films really offer that, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah. But this one didn't work for me. But there's elements in this film that I liked, but it was all just it was so boring.
I mean, basically, I've given this a 6 on IMDb, which is why I think I must have quite liked the Japanese cut of it when I first watched it. It might have just been because I was working my way through the entire series, and after however many films I've just rattled off, it was such a breath of fresh air to have this sort of serious approach, and it might have just been where it came, having watched all those other shitty films. Because when I watched it last night, and I did watch the American cut, I did not enjoy it at all. But I don't know if that's because it's very different, or if it's just because, like I say...
Well, I think you should probably go back and watch it, because I preferred the American cut.
Oh, really?
Just to briefly summarise it, it's the stuff they add in as the American stuff is completely pointless and worthless. But what they also do is cut about 15 minutes out of it, and that just makes the whole thing a little bit zippier. And it's not a big improvement, but it's just the story still doesn't make a lot of sense. But
Well, I think this struck a bit of a chord with me because I'm 10 years older than you two.
You're Cold War, baby.
You know, yeah. So the metaphor here is not the atom bomb; it's the Cold War. And you know, I was 9 in 1984, and even though I was only 9, I was terrified of nuclear war. You know, that was used to occupy a lot more of my brain than was probably healthy. Yeah. And so this, you know, I got that. I got that fear, and I was emotionally engaged with it. Even though I totally acknowledge everything you've said, it was a bit boring, but it had me hooked on that, and I think that I rated it a little higher because of that.
Interesting. Let's start with Godzilla. It seems not to be a man in a suit, but some sort of animatronic. Am I right? It looked like it.
I think no. I believe it's a man in a suit, but they've just advanced the technology of the suit. So I think there's some animatronic like touches on the suit.
I think all the facial expressions were animatronic.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was it had lots of little motors inside it. You know, but it's still basically a bloke in a rubber suit.
Yeah.
So basically, what this is saying is that even though technology can move forward, it doesn't mean it's going to look any better. In fact, it's going to look much worse. I thought the Godzilla in this was just awful.
Yeah, it does look crap.
I mean, but I was comparing it to the mid 1970s version of King Kong. I was trying to like make that comparison.
Well,
and it falls down on that even.
Yeah, but you know that is Hollywood budgets are very different to Japanese budgets. They stick with this rubber suit way of doing things for a long time, and you know it does. One of the films I kind of wanted us to watch is the 2004 Godzilla film. And it partly is because it's weird because they kind of have advanced the technology so much by that point that it kind of does look good. I don't know, it's weird. But yeah, it's not great here.
It's awful. I mean, it's not even a good design of the Godzilla. Its eyes are weird.
Yeah, it's got funny eyes. It was very distracting.
Yeah. And it doesn't have any life. It doesn't have any character. Okay, so then basically the film starts with a ship gets attacked. And it kind of implies it was attacked by Godzilla, but it's not. Godzilla comes around near it, but then all the people get killed by a giant sea louse, which is apparently a thing, which again is badly done. And it's a man holding a fake sea louse and moving around a lot and going, ah! Yeah, so
I thought that was an opening scene was, you know, you only get one chance to make a first impression. I thought, oh, this is going to be a long couple of hours.
But then all the stuff later is on about like, oh, Godzilla is a danger, but Godzilla didn't do anything, and he couldn't have killed those people. Which means the sea louse must have done them all in. Which, bear in mind, one of them killed it just by smashing it with a knife.
These sailors are all there with guns and knives, and they all get killed. But the photojournalist goes on and just kicks it in the head, and it's done.
So yeah, straight away, none of this is going to make any sense, is it? And that kind of just carries on, really. Not as long as you kind of have no sense of reality, then it works, I suppose. I mean, everyone.
I like the idea that this is all kicked off by a volcano erupting, because that's another that must always be in the subconscious of the Japanese people. You know, there's always volcanoes bloody everywhere, isn't
there? Yeah. But then they use it at the end. They use it as to save them. Everyone hates Godzilla. That's one thing I noticed in this film.
Yeah, he's back to being the villain.
Well, yeah, because the only experience they've had of him is the first film where he just bust everything up.
But no, it's more than that. It's more personal. They seem to take it really personally and like, oh, he killed all my friends on the ship. No, it was a sea louse. It wasn't even him. And even so, it's like being angry, you know, at a wild animal. It doesn't really make any sense.
People, do you not know how many stingrays got attacked after Steve Irwin got killed?
No, I don't.
Well, sadly, it was quite a few.
Oh, God.
So a big thing that Godzilla does now is he loves yummy, delicious nuclear material. Or just radioactivity in some way and searches for it. So, you know, he goes to a nuclear submarine and eats that, goes to a nuclear power plant and pulls out a big metal thing, which is apparently how nuclear power plants work, and eats that. Or sucks it out or something. I'm not sure exactly.
Nuclear power plants do have a core, which is held in a metal thing. That's all right.
Can you suck the nuclear stuff out of it? Like,
Well, this is a problem I had a couple of times. You know, Godzilla absorbs radiation.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how radiation works, is it? It sort of radiates.
that's when we go into the political element of it, that we get introduced to the Japanese Prime Minister, who is debating with a representative of the US and the USSR, who both... These
are my favourite scenes.
They've
were magnificent.
Both the US and USSR have kindly offered to nuclear bomb Godzilla for them. For some reason, they're not that keen on that idea. They are Japanese. So yeah, let's talk about those guys, because I mean that the US ambassador guy particularly was really, really acting.
So where do they find, if you're making a film in Japan in 1984, where do you find an actor to play an American? Because I don't think that was an American actor. I think it might have been an American, but it might have been just a bloke who worked in Subway.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, he's obviously, he just lives over there working. But there's also quite a lot of Russian characters, or, you know, characters that have to speak Russian. Some of them definitely don't sound like they know Russian.
No, exactly.
And I don't know Russian, so it has to be pretty
I think
obvious.
they might have been American as well.
Yes.
And the one with the Russian ambassador, they'd sort of made him look like Trotsky.
Yeah, there's sort of wispy hair on his face.
Yeah, it was like a bad fancy dress of Trotsky.
They're both very aggressive, really, in their own way. So, what is this all about? I mean, obviously, it's the Cold War analogy, but
well, it's Japan stuck in the middle, isn't it? Japan are literally on the front line of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately, the Japanese Prime Minister says no, he won't allow them to use nuclear weapons. They're a bit pissed off about that. And then someone who works on a Russian ship that has nuclear launch capabilities, like at first he goes and deactivates it, but then Godzilla comes and knocks the ship over. And so he goes back in. What is he doing? Why does he go back in?
I think he'd activated the weapon and he was going to deactivate it when Godzilla fucked shit up.
Okay. Yeah, so they're giving, like, tranquilizer pills to Godzilla just so he falls asleep for 10 minutes so we can deal with this nuclear thing and then move on with the rest of the plot. You've got our main sort of heroes that we've been following trapped in a building. There's a 10-minute scene of them trying to open a door, which is very riveting. And then the brother guy who was on the fishing boat, who was an engineering student and part-time fisherman, he's now working for helicopter-based rescue services, and he comes and gets them out of the building. Although he could get them out of the building, but instead just rescues the one guy and then goes off himself so that we can have our couple trapped in the building still and all that. It's so shit. It's so shit. There's so much elements going on that are crap. There's a sort of homeless guy.
The drunk junkie guy, yeah. What the hell's that about?
Well, I didn't have a problem with his character particularly. A bit of comic relief.
Yeah, it was an injection of personality in the film, I thought.
Although the way this little scene where he's running away from Godzilla and then falls over was pretty poor. So,
Alan, he fell over.
Oh, is that slapstick?
It's good, isn't it? He fell over. Imagine if Godzilla just tripped up.
That happens, doesn't it?
Isn't that happening in Mothra?
Does it? I know he's been felled a few times, but I mean, if he just imagine if Godzilla didn't trip over, but he stubbed his, when you kind of nearly go, but you kind of go fuck, and catch your foot,
and then you have to stagger forward really quickly.
Yeah. But then you have to kind of act like you meant to do it,
style it out,
and he knows everyone's watching him.
Here's another thing. Is this a tradition now? Is this a sort of fondly held tradition that Godzilla's relative size just sort of changes constantly from shot to shot?
Oh yeah, that's a well-established thing at this point, I think. I mean, it's obviously not intentional. It's just bad filmmaking, but that's not new. It is particularly bad in this film. I remember a shot where the guy falls down at Godzilla's feet, and Godzilla's quite near the start of this, and Godzilla's, maybe as tall as a house from the side, judging from the size of his foot, and then you cut to the long shot from really far away, and he's looming over the horizon, and everyone's running away, and it's he's just grown significantly from shot to shot there.
So, Gareth, you seem like you like this film. So, is there anything else you'd like to point out that?
Well,
may
let's
convince
not
me
get
of
carried
it?
away.
That's that one. I did watch the Americanized version as well, which I think you did, Sol.
Yeah, for the rewatch, yeah. I don't remember
Yeah.
enough about the original version to really do a good comparison, so it'd be interesting to hear you explain what was changed, because I like I say, should we rate the Japanese one then talk about the American one?
Sure, yeah.
If we might have different. Well, I yeah. So I mean, like I say, I gave it a 6 out of 10. I remember quite enjoying the Japanese cut in a kind of nonsense Godzilla way.
Just too many elements that were total nonsense, quite slow and boring. Too many threads going on at once, none of which really go anywhere. So I gave it a 3.
Fair enough.
Well, I've given it a 5, and I think that's probably a bit generous, to be honest. As I say, I kind of, I had that nervous anxiety watching it, which is more about my life than the film itself. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty terrible, wasn't
it? But yeah, I watched the American one last night, and I really didn't care for it. And I don't know how much of that's just I actually don't like this film as much as I remember, or what. But yeah, what differences were made? To me, it just felt like loads of awkward scenes of American actors were cut in between the.
Wasn't it badly filmed though? All those,
yeah.
Like Gareth, for your benefit, there's basically the additions are. It's like an underground bunker somewhere with some American military types who are not specified what they are, and some kind of machines with flashing lights on them that look like computers or something. It's basically just a bare room with a few seats in it. So they are commenting and occasionally watching on screen what's happening. They get a phone call from the somewhere in Japan, and they go, "Oh yeah, this is happening." But then they introduce Raymond Burr as the same character, who's called Steve Martin, by the way, as the same character from the 1956 Americanization. So they go to him, and he's hanging out with his grandson because he's like Perry Mason, Raymond Burr now, and they go to him and say, "Look, you're the only one with any experience of this, apart from everyone in Japan. So we need your help." And he goes to this underground bunker, and they go, "Thank God you're here, Steve Martin. You're the only American who's ever lived through this. We need your help."
And then he whacks out his little banjo, and he just he will not stop playing the banjo. He thinks people want to hear him play the banjo, but actually they're not interested. That's not why they like him.
And then he just sits there and does nothing, but they're all like trying to sort stuff out. And he's like, "That's not going to work." And then it doesn't work. And he's like, "See, I told you." Says it's Godzilla. You can't kill him. It's best just to leave him be. But so all this stuff is just spliced in. It's badly filmed. Basically, they obviously shot all Raymond Burr's stuff in about 45 minutes. That's like all the time he could give them. So there was one scene where he's introduced to the room. It's the first time he interacts with all the other people, but he doesn't interact with them. And it was just this sort of weird shot of him against a blank wall. And I was like, "Oh, right, so they obviously didn't have him on the same day as these other actors or stuff. They're going to have to film all this stuff as separate things." And then one of the other actors walks over to him and they have a chat. I was like, okay, so they had that one actor there. And then like 20 minutes later, there's another scene. And he's like, again, like, off camera from everyone else, and he's like awkwardly talking to them, and then it cuts to them, and it's like obviously they weren't there at the same time. And then the next scene comes along. It's a wide shot. He's in that room with everyone, with all the equipment and the other people, the other actors. So it's like, well, if you had him there, why did you shoot it the other stuff so terribly? Because even if you were shooting this stuff separately and had to just edit it together, it's still badly filmed. Like the framing is bad. It's just, it's awful. I don't know what they were doing. It looks like a crap 80s TV thing, but even so, it's like...
Well, based on my viewing last night, I would give the American cut a 3 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave it a 4, which is like 1 better than the Japanese version, just because it was shorter, and that is of great benefit. Well, this one, Return of Godzilla in 1984, were there sequels to this film?
Yes.
As in, was there its continuation?
Yeah, so the previous run of films before this were known as the Showa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Showa period.
Wasn't that the Emperor?
Yes.
The Showa period is like that period of Japanese history where the Emperor, well, Hirohito was alive.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's pretty grand to name your series of films after, a historical era.
Well, then, so this is the Heisei period, if I'm saying that correctly, of the Godzilla films. Began with the Return of Godzilla, and ran with so there were a total of 6 sequels made to this, 7 in this. 8 if you include the original Godzilla that this was a sequel to. So the first sequel was called Godzilla vs. Biollante or Biollante, depending on which Americanization you go with. And that is essentially Godzilla fighting a mutated rosebush, which I was...
Shut up. I mean, we've had some crazy animals, but vegetation.
Well, I was really excited to get to this one because I was like, "Oh, a plant monster! That's something new. Haven't seen that before." It's not done well. 4 out of 10. Sadly, it's bad. And off the back of that, they obviously agreed it wasn't done very well, and they just started remaking the classics. So the next one up was Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah again, and it is just an 80s version of that. 5 out of 10. Then they did Godzilla vs. Mothra in 1992, and it's that, but 1992.
モスラやモスラ動画化作やリノムストビンナドハンバハンバムヤランダバウラダドンジュカナカサクヤモスラ
4 out of 10. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, 1993, 4 out of 10. And then they made, in 1994, Godzilla vs. Super Godzilla, or sometimes known as Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. And this is... So the UN builds a kind of Mechagodzilla robot to keep Godzilla in check, but Godzilla's particles in space somehow... I think that must be related to a previous film. Particles of him in space somehow birth a new Godzilla from outer space who comes to Earth to attack everyone. And he's basically like a... have you ever heard the word tonk?
No.
I think it's a London thing. My ex used to use it, and I thought it was fucking weird and stupid word. But Space Godzilla, if you Google him, I mean, that is what tonk is. Hench.
What does it mean?
It means built like a brick house, a shit brick house.
Okay, I've never heard that.
He's a beefy biffer, is what he is. He's Godzilla with some big, massive, spiky shoulders, basically.
Yeah, I see him.
And then we had, so that's still more to go. One last film in the series, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, which is the aftermath of the Oxygen Destroyer from Makes a Return in the previous film.
Oh, yeah.
But that somehow brings forth...
I think you're pronouncing that incorrectly, so I'll have another go.
Go on.
Oxygen the Destroyer. You're welcome.
Space Godzilla, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, but I gave that one a 3 out of 10. Piss poor. And then, Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Is that right?
That's good.
Yeah, I gave that a 6 out of 10. So I must have quite liked it as a finale to the whole thing. Destroyer is just like a big, massive monster. He's much bigger than Godzilla. It really is the kind of like, oh shit, look how ridiculous this thing is. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Destroyer is born from nuclear radiation, and therefore he's like highly unstable, and they're worried he's gonna kind of have a meltdown at some point and just blow up. So there's a kind of ticking time bomb element to the whole thing as well. I just want to talk about the Rogues Gallery again, because I've kind of glossed over some of these, but I love Godzilla and his monsters, but I mean, how much do you know about his mates? Did you ever play Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee on the GameCube? Was that just me?
No, I'm too old for that.
I don't know which one of us that's a more ridiculous question for.
So there's Anguirus, who's one of the more iconic ones. Do you Do you know who I mean when I refer to this guy?
No.
He just looks like a dinosaur. He's got like spikes on his back. He's on all fours.
No, don't know that one.
That's one of the more iconic Godzilla bad guys. Rodan, you know who Rodan is, right? He's like a bat thing, but lizard.
Pterodactyl-looking thing.
Yeah, pterodactyl, yeah.
Yes, I know that one.
Yeah, Mothra, you know. King Ghidorah, you know. Ibira's that lobster one I mentioned.
Yeah, well, I didn't know him, and I googled him while you were talking, and I like that one.
He's an interesting design, yeah. Kamakarus is the praying mantis one. There's one I didn't mention before from Son of Godzilla called Kumonga, who is just a giant spider with spindly legs. He's horrible. He's just a big spider. Gross. Smash him up, Godzilla. There's Baragon, who was one of these characters from another film that they pulled in later down the line, and he's this like really shit. He looks like that thing from the face of that thing from the Neverending Story with like a horn, but then if you like shaved it, so it didn't have any fur.
It feels like they're maybe scraping the barrel a little here.
Yeah. Well, can I just get you to... So there's one from first appeared in King Kong Escapes, but has appeared in Godzilla films called Gorosaurus, who is like... You imagine like an off-brand Aldi...
No, yeah, he's great.
An off-brand Godzilla.
Yeah, no, that's a good description. He just looks like a dinosaur.
Yeah.
A crap dinosaur.
There's Manda, who's like an eel thing. Varan, who's like a flying squirrel thing. Another one I'd like you to Google, Gabara, Gabara. It just looks fucking hilarious, this thing. His neck's too long. He's like Bear in the Big Blue House.
Yeah, that just looks like a bloke in a suit, doesn't it?
Pretty tonk, though.
That doesn't look scary at all.
Yeah. The Smog Monster I've talked about, who I like, he takes a kind of humanoid form at one point to have a fight with Godzilla, and it is just like a big blob thing. It's great. Gigan is really quite iconic one. He's got like blades for hands and laser eyes.
Yeah.
Megalon's got like drill arms. I don't know if I mentioned that
I enjoyed
before.
Jaguar.
Yeah.
He was a good one.
Now I want to mention one of these ones from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. One of my favourites, King Caesar, he's called. Now, this is a really interesting one because it's like this big furry lion-looking thing, and he kind of it draws upon this weird like Japanese folklore. He's played like an ancient Japanese spirit or something, which is very different to the usual lizardy monsters.
Yeah, his face looks like when you see those samurai masks.
Yeah. He's an interesting one. And then there's a load of other shitty things. Titanosaurus, Biollante, the thing I just mentioned, all the mechas.
Plant.
It goes on and on, but that was the end of the Heisei period, like I say. Then in 1999, they launched the Millennium period of Godzilla films. And this ran for 6 films, which I'll briefly cover now, and then we're poised to jump into the American ones in the next episode. To launch that Godzilla Millennium in 1999, which again was just a big reboot, same exact thing. You kind of pick up from the first film being canon and ignoring everything else. A flying saucer appears with a monster called Augur in it, or it turns into the monster, and Godzilla turns up to save the day. I can't quite remember how these films worked, but I seem to remember it being something like they're all standalone at a certain point. Like, some of them are sequels to the previous ones, but some of them just keep going back to Godzilla as the only one that's existed. I gave it a 5 out of 10. Then they did Godzilla versus Megaguirus, which I gave a 6 out of 10. It's just another Godzilla fighting nonsense film. Nothing particularly remarkable about it. Then Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all-out attack, which is regarded as one of the very best, actually. It's got 7.2 on IMDb, but, I mean, again, I just thought it was par for the course, 5 out of 10. Then they remade Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla again. I gave this one a 6 out of 10, so it certainly seems like I enjoyed these Millennium films a bit more. I guess the special effects were just a bit more on point. What I was saying about them kind of the technology improving, I think, really was noticeable at this point. The suits had a bit of, these animatronic touches, and it just came together. One thing that is quite noticeable in this period is how anime-esque it all became. All the human characters are just sort of, you know, these young anime types who are part of the Godzilla squadron, and you know, it's not any sense of reality kind of goes out the window.
Right.
Then we got Godzilla SOS in 2003, which was just another big fight between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, and Mothra, I think, got involved in that. I gave that 5 out of 10. And then the finale of the entire Godzilla franchise for a while was Godzilla Final Wars. And that came out in 2004 and was poised as this is the last ever Godzilla film. It's the 50th anniversary of Godzilla. And this film is Godzilla travels around the world fighting every monster he has ever battled ever in the entire franchise, including the monster from the American 1998 remake that we're going to be talking about next week, which they were very upset with, and they included to basically say that's not the real Godzilla, this is, and we're going to beat the shit out of him now. So it's very light on plot, as you might imagine. Full of fan service, if only the franchise was a bit better, and that was enough to kind of keep it going. I gave it a 4 out of 10. It's all just a bit shit. But that was the end of Godzilla, really, until very recently. We will talk about them reviving it again next week, but along with some American offshoots that are their own continuity. So yeah, Godzilla. It's great first film. A lot of sequels.
Yeah.
It's a weird, insane franchise, and like I say, it's Toho, the company that make it. It's their bread and butter. It's what they've been living off really for 50, 60, 70 years at this point. And you know, they do other things. They're one of the biggest film companies in Japan.
We'll be jumping back in next week with the first American remake, the Matthew Broderick one, which was made in 98, was it?
1998, like yes, that is correct.
So that's where we'll be jumping in next week.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to rewatching that, actually.
Yeah, me too.
That's one I have a lot of childhood nostalgia for. I went to see in the cinema. I watched the cartoon series that tied in with it as a child. That's where I know Godzilla from. Okay. So, will it hold up? Will it hold up, Alan? Do you think it's going to be good?
I think it's going to be as good as it ever was.
I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I've already watched it, and no.
Hey, I loved it as a kid. Matthew Broderick,
Jean Reno, and Hank Azaria.
Yeah, it's like half the cast of The Simpsons in that film.
Harry Shearer's in it, isn't he?
Yeah.
Join us.
Ding dong! Oh, it's Godzilla. Just pretend we're not in. We'll hold him off till next week.
History shows again and again how nature points up the valley of